Hi everyone, this is Stephanie from mamaandbabylove.com, and you are listening to my new podcast, and I am here today with Greg, the founder of Eartheasy.com, and thanks so much for being here, Greg, first off.
You're very welcome. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, so I came across Eartheasy.com the first time earlier this summer. So for readers that have been following Mom and Baby Love a long time know that we recently moved from North Florida up in the Panhandle, which is pretty much like Georgia. It's not anything, like the rest of Florida. And we moved down to South Florida. And we sold our house in Tallahassee, and we are renting a smaller house in South Florida as we sort of just find our footing and get used to the area and figure out where we want to live and save money and all that. So our house down here has a tiny backyard, and I lost my big huge garden. It was a 10-foot by 30-foot garden, and so I had a huge backyard. So not only did I have my 10 by 30-foot garden in Tallahassee, I also had basically an edible backyard where all the trees were fruit trees, and we had blueberry bushes, and I just tried to make as best use of our yard as possible. And, so we moved down here, and the first thing I did was look for garden containers, and I came across Eartheasy.com and immediately was sold. And I'm so glad that we got hooked up together, Greg. Your company is amazing. So why don't we start there? Why don't you share with them about why you started Eartheasy and sort of how that came to be?
Okay. I started Eartheasy in the year 2000. At that point, my youngest child was in high school. And so I had already had experience now of living off-grid for about 15 years.
Wow.
And I had experience raising children off-grid. And so I felt I had a body of knowledge and experience that I wanted to share with people, because I was excited about it, because I led a very special life because of moving off-grid. And there were many rewards that came into play that I didn't even really expect. And so I really felt that we had a great life, and yet we lived with a very low impact on the environment, which was also important to me. And I just felt I wanted to share what I had learned with other people so that they could sort of cherry pick from my experience and maybe apply that to their lives. Not necessarily the broad spectrum, but even just in small ways, putting a small backyard garden, for example, or getting into composting, or, a variety of things. So I just wanted to sort of put all that information into one website and design it in such a way that it'd be easy for people to go through and take what would apply to their lives.
Sure.
And hopefully benefit somewhat from my experience. So that was the motivation.
That's awesome. And I mentioned that in my post that I did about your website. It's very similar to the intention of my website, was to simply just share my story and the body of knowledge that I had accumulated the last 10 years in healing and health and parenthood and motherhood and all of that. Was, just wanting to get the information out there, and people could pick and choose what they want. Don't have to take it all.
Yes.
Cool. So tell us a little bit more about living off the grid. When I imagine that and I try and picture myself doing that, it's hard to even wrap my mind around it. And I'm pretty green, I'm pretty, like, I've been composting since I was 18, and I'm pretty non-traditional at this point, but even for me, it's difficult to even comprehend.
Well, there were indeed some challenges to living off grid. It was a big move at the time. I was, born in Long Island and lived in cities most of my life. My childhood life, I lived on Long Island in a suburban community.
Uh-huh.
But then when I went to finish university, I worked I worked in New York City for a while. Then I worked in Boston for the Department of Mental Health for 3 years in my early 20s. Then I moved to San Francisco and worked there for a few years.
Oh.
All the time I was really trying to find my groove in life, what I wanted to do, and what kind of life I wanted to live, and I loved nature, and I just took comfort in nature, and I felt that my parents led a stressful life, and it was difficult for them, even though they were both university graduates and career people. My
Sure.
mother was an advertising copywriter, and my father
Wow.
worked for Look magazine. My mother was the first woman graduate of Brooklyn University. She was the first woman journalist for the New York Journal American. So my
Wow.
parents had a lot. They had a lot going for them.
Yeah, a lot of
And
ambition.
I, in a way, I felt they were, they were well prepared for life, and yet I saw them have a difficult time keeping up. It was tough raising 4 children. One child was handicapped, and that required extra attention and money and time. And so I just saw it was a real struggle for them. And I also felt that just seeing our community, there was a lot of rapid development going on in the 60s, 50s and 60s
Sure.
in Long Island. And the development was, it concerned me because I was watching large forested areas be gobbled up. And I just felt maybe there's another way to live that's more light on the earth. And at the same time, during this time, I worked for the American Museum of Natural History, and I was their supervisor of a centennial exhibit called Can Man Survive? And this was in the early 70s, and it was about the impact our modern lifestyles are having on the environment.
Wow.
And having seen that, I really felt an obligation to try to find another way to live that was more responsible to the environment. And so I had all these things stirring in my head, and I didn't know how to resolve them. I read a book called How to Live at Home in the Woods by Vina and Jeers. And that turned me around because they basically were struggling with the same conflicts, and they decided to move off grid, and they wrote a book about it. And that book showed me that it's possible, and that if it doesn't work out, well, then you can turn around and come back, and, and try jump back into the swim.
Right.
So I felt that it was sort of a measured challenge for me, and I would make the challenge. I spent some time trying to find the right woman partner to go with me on this journey, journey.
Awesome.
And then we found a beautiful piece of land that we went for, and it was a small rural island, and there were no services.
Did you say it was the San Juan Islands?
It's just north of the San Juan Islands.
I've been there, and it is gorgeous out there. Just gorgeous.
They're beautiful, beautiful islands, but they're rugged.
Yeah.
And the lifestyle can be fairly tough.
Yeah.
However, because it's in the moderate temperature of the Northwest, the great thing is that we can garden much of the year.
Wow.
And actually, we have some beds that run 12 months.
Sure.
Garden year round for some crops, but basically our typical growing season is long.
Right.
So that really made it possible to supplement our lifestyles as much as possible by growing our own food. And so, growing food and providing for yourselves is part of the off-grid sentiment. And I was young enough and idealistic enough that I figured I could do this. And so we went there, and we built our own home and built our own boats and raised our children, taught them ourselves, and right up through to high school years, and then eventually they transitioned into mainstream high schools, because I feel at teenage years children need other children, lots of them to bounce off of, and the hard part of living in a small remote area is that a small island in a remote community is that there's not many peers for your children.
Right.
And so you, the parent, have to be the peer. I would say a large part of the story of my living off grid was really the story of parenting children off grid. Because the rest of the stuff, and you can negotiate your way through. You can figure out how to do what you need to do. But
Sure.
raising children is a whole other game. It's a whole other responsibility.
Right.
And so that's what it really, to me, was all about. Was about how do I successfully, raise my children, impart my values to them, let them benefit from the environment they're growing in, yet not let it be a detriment to them,
Sure.
be a setback to them. So that was the tricky part.
So what
And
did you do to feel like you were parenting successfully? Like, what did you do to,
okay,
give yourself the
well,
skills or whatever, teach yourself, how to be a good
okay,
parent?
well, one thing I learned um, young. By the time I was 8 or 10 years old, I realized I had heard enough from other adults that there's a common regret among adults that they didn't have enough time with their children when their children were young because the pressures of their careers came into play. At the same time, it's tough being a young parent because you're also just getting going on your career,
Mm-hmm.
and there are often demands on you at the workplace that draw you away from your family.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's tough to balance all that. And so the beauty of living off grid was we had all the time in the day to be with our children.
Mm.
And just about everything I did, my children did with me,
Mm.
right from when they were literally infants.
Aw.
Well, I would go fishing every night in the dory, not every night, but often in the
Mm-hmm.
evening, and I would take my baby and put him in the back. I had a little nested area in the dory where he would be in, and he would go out fishing with me. We might be gone for 2 hours, and he was always happy, and I did this with each of my children. Wherever we would go, whatever we would do, the children would be with us. And so so one thing's for sure, we had plenty of time with our children.
Yeah.
That's one regret I will never have.
Yeah. That's wonderful.
And then, the other one was, which we touched on earlier, which was education.
Mm-hmm.
It was very important to me that my children not be hindered by this off-grid living experience, that they be socially able to interact with people comfortably, that their social skills would be strong, and that their academic skills would be strong enough that they could transition to a mainstream high school and university, should they choose.
Right.
And which is how it worked out. So my wife and I, we did a lot of homeschooling,
Mm-hmm.
and basically at the beginning of each year, we would go to the school district, in the nearby towns, and find out what's the expected requirement for this particular year. What are they
Right.
supposed to learn in grade
Right.
6? And then we would get a list of it all. Then as I said, we had a small 2-room schoolhouse on the island, but there were only, maybe 20 students for all grades from grade 1 to grade 8.
Wow.
And so the teachers could not cover those subjects for each children. And so, we would then go talk with the teacher, find out what they were missing,
Mm-hmm.
and then we'd cover that ourselves at home at night. And then basically it was part of our family ritual. Every night, without a fail, we would spend an hour or two with them on academics or reading. Reading is academics too, but I mean, we would
right.
read
Of course.
to them. My wife did the lion's share of that. I have to give her the credit. So by the time they were ready to go to high school, they were not only on par with everyone. In some ways, they were ahead. They did really well when they transitioned.
Oh, I'm sure.
I'm high
sure.
School. And in fact, my older boy got a scholarship.
Wow.
And then university, they went through university very successfully. So I would say that there was no setback at all academically in the off-grid experience. And I would say that the children became independent. They're very independent as adults, and they have a sort of an attitude of whatever needs doing, we can do it ourselves.
Resourcefulness, yeah.
And you're in business, and I think you realize also that you have to wear many hats when you do your own business, and so it helps to be multi-talented, or to at least feel that you can take not even so much multi-talented. It's just attitude.
Right.
If you think you can take something on, well, you can. You just get into it. And you roll your sleeves up, and you do whatever needs being done. And so the whole experience has been successful for them.
That's awesome. Yeah, I imagine that resourcefulness, just was, they just saw it by example, seeing you go out and do whatever needed to be done, and, tackling it.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
So,
and I, of course, learned by example from older members in the community.
That's cool.
Because, it was new to me to move off grid.
That's nice that you had mentors too.
So I had mentors too, and it was, it made it possible.
That's wonderful.
And the other thing interesting is that because the community is so small, there's no real, the ages all speak to each other. Everyone communicates with each other. So, like my older son, when he was about 6 or 7 or 8 years old and was starting to wanting to go out fishing on his own, or just broaden his social circle, he got a new fishing buddy. It was fishing buddy, a guy named Gordon. Well, Gordon was in his 20s, and here he was hanging out with my kid who was preteen.
Wow.
And well, that's normal in many rural communities.
Right.
People talk with all the different ages.
Yeah.
I think that's really healthy.
I think it is too.
It's really healthy for children to be able to speak on a first name basis with adults.
Right.
And communicate.
Right.
Because adults, I believe adults naturally want to help children.
Sure.
And so they're always giving them good advice, or giving them the benefit of their experience.
Yeah.
So it was something I didn't expect, but it was another nice
added benefit.
Living in a small community.
That's cool. Yeah, my daughter, Penelope, she is almost 4, and we don't homeschool her. She goes to a Montessori school here, and the way they group it there is they group it from 3 to 6. So she's in a classroom with 3 to 6-year-olds, and whoever they get assigned, as their teacher in that classroom, they stay with that teacher for 3 or 4 years, and so it's a mixed age, and then they get this consistency of one teacher for 3 years, and just similar to what you were talking about, she's getting the benefit of talking to 6-year-old boys, that she wouldn't have that opportunity in a more traditional public school setting, or she would not get with me if she was just home with me all day, doing lessons. So
that's right.
Yeah, I totally see the benefit of that. One quick thing, when you were mentioning that you and your wife were doing, an hour or 2 of lessons in the evening, I think that's really interesting, because that's something that I'd like to do with Penelope, and we're kind of starting to do that now, where she's getting very interested in learning how to read, which is, at 3.5 is kind of early, like she wants to know how to read right now, and she's very frustrated that she can't sit by herself and read a book. So now I'm in the process of educating myself how I can teach her how to read early, even though it's not really, time or whatever. And so we're going to start spending time in the evenings, and, essentially I'm going to teach her how to read. And, I think a lot of families may struggle with wanting to do something like that, but not having the time, because they do not live off the grid. They do not own their own businesses. They do not have the lifestyle that would maybe afford them that sort of time. And so, do you have any tips for people like that?
Yes. Well, that's it. You've hit it in a nutshell. People want to do these things, but they're just pressured. People are so, we're all so busy. Our modern lifestyle is a very busy lifestyle. We have more input than anyone's ever had in the past, in human history.
Yeah.
We are bombarded with information. And it's, on the one hand, that's a great thing. It's a great thing, and we have many benefits from this. But on the other hand, it is also distracting. And I felt that for children, I was a little anxious about my children and about raising the idea of raising children in such a busy environment, because frankly, I myself sometimes feel almost overwhelmed by the complexity of modern life and the intensity of modern life, and so much is coming at us so fast. And so I go, well, how's a child going to handle that? And actually, that was, and this was even back in the 70s and early 80s. I was feeling this,
right.
and so that was actually a large reason why I wanted to move off grid. I wanted to be able to raise my children, to have time with them, and just a little bit less of input from the outside world. I figured we didn't even have a television for those, all those years.
Yeah, and I think that is
huge. I have no, I have nothing against television.
Sure.
But I just wanted to feel, for the first number of years, at least the first, early years of their lives, that we could just slow things down and impart our values to our children. Let them get to know us. We get to know them. Then we release them to the world.
Right.
And that's the way it sort of played out. And we never missed anything. We never sat around saying, "Gee, I wish we had television or something."
Right.
We had about 20 years worth of National Geographic magazines collected.
Wow.
And that, in a sense, that was our television. Whenever my wife would be busy cooking dinner, then the children would sit with me on my lap in the big stuffed chair, and then we would be going through National Geographic.
Wow.
1 minute we're reading about, something going on in Pakistan. The next minute we're reading about camels, and then National Geographic is great for children because it keeps going from topic to topic.
Right.
And it's educational. So we would just those kids were raised on National Geographic magazine.
That's awesome. That's awesome. My husband was too. So yeah, I think what you tapped on about having the no TV, that's been huge for us. We actually have TVs, but just my husband and I's personalities were just not big TV watchers. And so we sort of I think a lot of Americans, especially, like their habit is just to turn on the TV as soon as they get home, whether it's for background noise or to actually, sit down and watch a show. And just for whatever reason, my husband are just not like that. And so a lot of times people will ask me, how do you have so much time to cook, from scratch meals or do whatever I'm doing? And honestly, I think the biggest answer is that I don't watch TV. I think people have no idea how much time they are actually spending watching TV. So you could just open up huge pockets of time simply by not watching TV.
That's true. That is true. Yeah. Yeah, it's a balancing act. Every day is a balancing act, and no matter where we are, even in a modern society, it's very, very tough to resolve all these different responsibilities that we have.
Yeah.
Which is why, I felt living off grid, it just simplified everything.
Yeah.
There was just way fewer inputs in life, and I still, cherish living off grid.
That's awesome. Yeah, it sounds amazing. Sounds very idyllic, and just a beautiful way to raise kids. So happy for you that you got to have that experience with your family. And I've communicated with one of your sons. How do you pronounce his name? Is it Aaron? Aaron. Sorry, I'm horrible at pronouncing names. But yeah, he's just been wonderful to deal with, and I could totally see how his experience of childhood has made him, into the man he is today. And so it must be very validating for you to see your boys be so happy and healthy and successful.
It is. It is very validating, and it's important to me that they reach out to other people, and they're outside of themselves. They're very other directed, and that's what I'm most proud of my children is is the way they treat other people. They look to how they can help other people, and they're very considerate young adults, and I think that's great. You know, sort of a side thought to what we're saying, but because of your website, Mama and Baby Love, I find that when you're young, when you're born, you're pretty much centric. The world centers around you.
Mm-hmm.
As a young person, still you're sort of the center of your world.
Mm-hmm.
But a profound thing happened when my first child was born, and I looked at his in the eyes. Something that they didn't tell us in the classes we took, the
parenting, childbirth, yeah,
pre-birth classes,
mm-hmm.
and we learned all the how to cope, how to help coach for the breathing and
right.
all the different things. But the one thing they didn't tell us was the profound experience you have when you first look in the eyes of your first child.
Mm.
And what hit me was it's the first time in life when suddenly you love someone more than yourself.
Mm.
All of a sudden you're no longer the center of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
Your child is the center of your universe.
Mm.
And it's a profound change. And I think many people go through this when they go from being a childless person to a person with children. They think they expect. I believe most people experience this. They may not realize it literally, but they experience it emotionally.
Mm.
And so what I'm pleased to see with my children is that they have a lot of this already without having had children themselves.
Wow. Yeah.
And so I think part of that comes from being in a small community where you interact with people on a personal way, and I think part of that just comes from their worldview, because they've had a lot of time to just to contemplate and to come up with their own values, and to become the people that they are now. I feel in a way that they matured quickly. Maybe it was because they were in the company of adults often when
mm-hmm.
they were children. But that's what I'm proud of when I think of my children now, is the way they treat other people and the way they consider other people.
That's beautiful. Just beautiful. I totally agree that there's something hugely transformational that happens when you look into the eyes of your child for the first time. I think it's really interesting to hear a man speak about it, honestly, because I've only really had conversations like that with women. And I think it's really nice to hear a man be so present and mindful and conscious. So I think this is a nice side gift to give. Maybe there's some dads listening to this that want to be more mindful and present and conscious and peaceful and kind and loving, and it's nice to hear you speak like that.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It's just how I feel. Having children has made my life. I realize now, I had a rich life, but I realize now that once I had children, looking back, my earlier life seemed empty now. And I just they've just filled up my cup and made my life joyful.
Yeah.
And so the natural thing, of course, is to try to return the favor.
Right.
And then, of course, once your children get older, then you want to be that way to others. You never end up wanting to be a good parent to children. And I find both my wife and I reach out to other children in the community who we see maybe only have a single parent, or have some challenge that my children didn't have. And so you want to reach out and help them as well.
Yeah.
And so on the one hand, having children is a responsibility, and it takes a lot from you. But on the other hand, I believe it returns far more. And so it's beautiful relationship, and I think that's why life goes on.
Yes, totally. I couldn't agree more. Yeah, motherhood has been my greatest joy and greatest accomplishment as well. Well, Greg, we're getting up to 30 minutes here, and it's just been awesome talking to you. What a wealth of knowledge you are about living off the grid and sustainably living. But then all these other gems of knowledge about parenting. So I really appreciate you talking and sharing your wisdom with the listeners today. And again, everyone who's listening, you can find out more information about Greg and his beautiful family and their experiences of living off the grid. If you go to their website, eartheasy.com, they have mountains of articles and just, I mean, literally, it's archives after archives of well-written, well-researched, easy to read articles about living off the grid, sustainably living, cooking, gardening. I mean, just if you have followed Mama and Baby Love, you're into that sort of thing, so please go to their site and check it out. And then, on top of just the resources of information, they have for sale lots of products for sustainable living. And again, I came to them specifically for gardening resources because I wanted container gardening type things, but they have a million other different things: water conservation, non-toxic pest control, energy efficiency, green home type stuff. You can't you're just gonna have to go and spend some time on their site and really see the wealth of different types of products that they have. So again, Greg, thank you for spending some time with us today, and I really appreciate it. It was nice talking to you.
Likewise, Stephanie, you're very welcome, and thank you for calling.
Thanks so much for listening to the Mama and Baby Love podcast. This podcast is sponsored by the Mama and Baby Love online store. There you will find all kinds of products and resources to help you heal, learn how to cook real food, and live your life as natural as possible. If you like this podcast, be sure to come on over to mamaandbabylove.com and sign up for my email newsletter and follow me on social media. I am on Facebook, Google+, Pinterest, Twitter, and Instagram. Thanks for listening, and so much love to you.